Hi there. Well, thank you. Yeah, mind, body, and spirit. The interesting thing for me is I've spent probably the last 5.5 years on the road. And so I'm always someone to find kind of a silver lining in something. And in truth, I have a 15-year-old daughter, and it's actually been a time for me to almost reconnect with my family. I've spent so much time traveling, and being away from them, that this time is kind of reconnected. So for my sanity, what I'm trying to do is actually teach my daughter how to drive right now. The roads are quiet, so it's perfect. But it's really just been a chance to reconnect. I think physically, certainly I have dogs, much like Alicia. I have several dogs, and they are probably the fittest dogs on the block because now they're getting regular walks, and so they're pretty happy. And I think for me, I'm always someone as a coach that wants to, I think it's important we want to continue to evolve. And so this has actually given me a pause to be able to continue, educating myself. So whether it's listening to podcasts, participating in different events, my daughter's even got me into a couple of Netflix shows that I've never really been involved in that kind of thing. So just kind of overall trying to educate myself and continue to grow as a person is kind of what I've been doing. But I would love to get started. I'm delighted to be here. Obviously, I'll quickly share that actually my daughter Lily, we grew up in she grew up in Mexico. I adopted her. Her first formative years were spent in Los Angeles, and she actually learned to swim at a YMCA. So it has touched my life on a personal level. So I'm delighted to be here. Hello to everybody. This is an amazing program. It's been both educational and inspirational to kind of listen to the previous speakers, and I'm really looking forward to the questions at the end. I'm hopeful with a global audience that we have, and I'm going to try and speak slower. I get a coach, I get excited when I talk about soccer. I'm hopeful with a global audience that we have some football fans out there, maybe even some former football players, but regardless of whether you are a sports fan or not, as leaders, as agents of change in our respective fields, we have a lot in common and we walk a very similar path. And, I would say essentially as leaders, you function as head coaches of your respective environments. And whether you lead a team of 2 or 200, your charge is to create this cohesive and dynamic environment that can maximize the strengths of the individual and enhance the team's success. Now, that's not easy in a normal and working environment, right? But with the current times and and the space that we've been thrust into with this global pandemic, this task becomes even more challenging and perhaps for some a little bit daunting. But I think the first message I want to share with you guys today is this simple one, and that's why I've got this visual. It is to keep coaching your team. Consistency, we talk about in soccer, the sign of a really good team and the sign of a really good player is consistency. But I think consistency for your team right now is something that they can lean on. It may feel emotionally kind of like this visual that your locker room is empty, that your bench is vacant, and that there's no fans in the crowd. But first and foremost, I think we have to acknowledge and recognize that your team still needs you, even though their world is maybe upside down and their environment is very different. It's important to make sure that you still lead and you're still there for them. And because they need to feel like they have a purpose and they have to feel that they have someone to follow, even when there is so much uncertainty in the world that we're living in right now. Many of my friends who are university coaches, they're not even sure if there's going to be a season to play this coming fall. But what they committed to is the greater picture, and they're committed to the development of their players. So what are they doing right now as leaders, as coaches, even though they don't physically have a team to coach? They're reviewing game film in Zoom meetings. They are having team talks and discussing the roles of captains and how they visualize that. They're helping their players set, and I just heard Alicia talk about individual targets and goals in terms of their development. And so in essence, they're continuing to coach. They are continuing to give their players purpose. And I think, again, especially just with the previous speaker, listening to the mental capacity inside of this, I think that balance or that stability is still very, very important in terms of your staff and your players. I call them players, but your staff has this consistency. Within your coaching, I think right now there are 3 things that you can really hone into, highlight, and focus on. And I'll go through each of them, but I think the first one is connection, that both of our previous speakers have touched upon. It is critical, it is essential, and right now it is the priority with your team, is to feel connected. And your staff have got to feel connected on 2 levels, I think. They have to feel certainly connected to you as a leader, and they also have to feel connected to the whole, to the team, to the environment, to the organization. So there's almost 2 levels, 2 bonds that you're hoping to form here. Thanks for that. I forgot about the slide. But I think for me as a leader, it was important, or it still is important, to truly understand the fabric of the people around me. You can't expect and ask people to be at their very best if you don't truly know who they are and what they're about as people. And I think with the women's national team, I believe that it was important for my staff and my players to feel valued. And so I made sure that I knew them as individuals first and foremost. So, for example, I knew that Rose Lavelle, one of our younger players, she scored the game winner in the last summer's World Cup. She comes from a large family. She has a bulldog named Wilma. I know that my goalkeeper coach has, excuse me 1 second. Sorry, live streaming the dog. Hang on. Sorry, I need help.
Actually, it's great because this does, just to your point, Alicia, it brings us back to the personal, makes us all more human. That's great. Thanks, Joe.
Sorry about that. It's my dear sweet dog, one of them. She's blind, and I swear to God, she can smell me wherever I am. So she's trying to find me. But anyways, what I was talking about was like knowing the human capacity of your team. So, I know that my goalkeeper coach, Graham, he has two young children. Kelly O'Hara, one of my players, one of our most dynamic players, this was a player that best received information one-on-one. And so we would watch her clips individually rather than watching them in front of the team. It was important for these players and my staff to know that they mattered to me outside of the playing field, that they were more than just a commodity to me, that they were human beings. And so to know a little bit about their lives outside of the soccer field, I think lends itself to building a healthier and a better community. So, my advice or my recommendation to you guys that are, coaching your teams and your leaders is take time to check in with your staff as individuals, to know and ask. And, one of the things I used to say about my leadership style was I tried to lead with empathy and truthfulness, meaning I always tried to understand where someone was coming from, but always was very honest in my feedback to players. But I think what I'd recommend to people is know the people that you're working with, know their situation, understand it. And much like Alicia touched upon, one of the things that it's easy for me when I'm around my team to gauge and understand who responds well to what and what is the makeup of their personality. That becomes harder when you're doing it virtually. Hang on, can we just go back 1 second? Sorry, the slide. So I think you know, knowing that some of your staff might be incredibly shy, they're not going to speak up on a Zoom call. So this capacity to touch your staff on an individual level and check in with them, I think is critical, because ultimately, you know, what I've learned as a coach is if we can maximize the individual, we will maximize the team's success. Um, the next slide, if you could show it now, sorry about that, Nikita. I chose this visual to kind of reinforce the importance of being connected as a whole to the team. So this is a visual after every game. This is actually after the semi-final of the World Cup last summer. You can tell we're a little bit excited in this visual, but we did this after every game, and we would call it kind of just our bring it in situation. And it became a habit, and it became part of our tradition that our team would huddle up. And as I thought about like this, obviously the global YMCA, this program that you're doing today, you as an organization are having this moment, albeit virtually, but it really is this, what you're creating right now is a virtual representation of this bring it in moment. And these are so important to an organization and with your respective teams, because for us, it wasn't about the physical connection that you see of everybody's arms around each other. It wasn't so much that, it was the simple act of reaffirming that we are one unit, we are one team. And at that moment, everybody hears the same message. And, you know, in soccer, we win games and we lose games. But in this moment, whether we won or we lost the game, the emotional sense was we are in this together, we have each other's backs, and we have strength as a community. So I think this is a very, very important part of your role as a leader, is establishing the individual and the collective connection you have with your team. As a national team, our players would be apart from each other more than we'd actually be together. It was almost like an all-star team. People would travel in and we'd be together. But my staff and I worked very hard to create a culture of pride and excellence, so that the values, the expectations, and the habits that we had when we were physically together stayed with our players and our staff, even when we were thousands of miles apart. And I think by doing that, our players consistently stayed invested in the team, because they took those values, they took those feelings of connection, they took them back to their home club environments and still managed to stay connected to our national team. And my sense, you know, I've done a little bit of research on the global Y, is that you also have a very special culture and brand. And for the leaders out there that are listening to this, tap into that, because it's a wonderful resource to utilize with your staff. If we can slide to the next slide now, please, that'd be awesome. Thank you so much for your help. All right, so the second thing I wanted to touch upon was the importance of reinforcing roles. You know, I've been in coaching for a long time, maybe 25 plus years, and I've had the privilege of working with a lot of different teams. And what I found unequivocally is a team in which members not only know their roles, but embrace their roles. Those teams will have a higher percentage of success if that is kind of an expectation and a standard within the team. So to give you kind of a tangible example, Crystal Dunn was a player on my team, a world-class player. And with her club team, she plays the role as a forward, as an attacking player. For our US team, we needed her to play as a left defender. Now, this player, phenomenal talent. She's not even naturally left-footed, but she did it and executed her role perfectly. And I think when you can create a team-first environment that we did, our players embraced a willingness to do whatever is necessary for the success of the team. And I think that is also important. Right now, your staff and your your team, they are maybe having to embrace different roles or step into, potentially, even if there are layoffs and things that are happening, people are now either having their roles maybe increased, maybe it's slightly shifted, but there has to be an attitude and a willingness. And we have this mantra with our team: mission matters most. And it was this sense that we are prepared to do whatever we need to do for the team. Going into the 2019 World Cup, I think our players knew the roles and the responsibilities of their positions, and there were no gray areas. And I think what that enabled us to have was this continuity, and that continuity in turn gave us confidence. So sometimes this for a fact. I mean, I'd be in team meetings and you'd be like, hey, any questions? And they'd all sit there because they're intimidated to ask the question in front of the group of maybe a tactical question, or maybe a question about what their role was in that particular moment. So make sure that you facilitate with your group that asking questions, potentially reaching out to them individuals is really critical, because the more your staff and your players and your team knows what the expectations and knows their roles, the more successful your team will be. But I want to sort of even hone into that even more about roles and touch into probably the role that actually was the biggest reason we won the World Cup last summer. It was the role of the game changer. Now, I think that this is a term, we started using it 5 years ago. I think it's become a more and more common term that people have heard, and I think you guys actually use it, the change agent, or the agent of change, or game changer. But the reason we came to that was because essentially what we did is, before the game, the night before the game, I would put up the starting lineup. And in the past, years ago, I'd put the starting lineup up, and then I would list, as we do in soccer, we would call them substitutes or reserves. And that was the title that we had for the players that weren't in the starting 11. And the more we kind of reflected on it, the more we felt that, you know what, these players are critical to our success. So we actually termed them, instead of substitutes, we termed them game changers, because that is what they were. And for our run in the World Cup last summer, we were dependent on the ability of a player to come in and influence in a positive way our game. The situation might be different. We might be trying to preserve a lead, so we need this skill set. It might be that we were trying to score a goal and force a goal. We would select this game changer. But the reality is, these players, because we value them, because we, before every game after we would play, the next day I would do a review of the match. And instead of showing pictures of the goals we've scored in that game, I would actually show visuals of the bench celebrating, much like you see in this picture here, because it said to the players that were on the field, these players are important. It said to the players on the bench, we are ready and prepared to step in at any moment and help us. So the role of the game changer is critical. What could that look like, for your staff in your environment? I think overall it's saying, how can you positively impact our environment? It might be as simple as a kind word. It might be exercising patience, right? Because in these times, sometimes our frustration levels can be really high. It might be something so simple, but I would encourage your own environment to have your personnel start to think about, how can I be a game changer? Again, it's not always the leader. It might be the person that's supporting the leader, but all of us together, much like Alicia was talking about, all of us together can positively fill the well and make the collective feel much, much better. So I think that's, I also think maybe even asking someone their opinion. One of the things that I learned with my players is, the more I could involve them in the process, the more invested they became. So when I was a young leader, I used to think I have to have all the answers and we have to do it this way. But as I grew and as I matured, I realized that collaboration was the key to a successful team. So, you know, be open to asking people what they think. You're not expected to have all the answers, and you are stronger together, obviously, with all the expertise you have within your team. All right, if we can slide up the next slide, that would be great. This is my staff shortly thereafter in the locker room. And, you know, it kind of, obviously the picture kind of captures it all, but leading with optimism. My father was a soccer coach, and he is probably the most positive human being I've ever been around. It doesn't matter what the situation, there's always a silver lining. You know, if I would call him sometimes, I'd be so frustrated I couldn't find my keys or my wallet, and my dad would be like, just imagine how excited you're going to be when you find it. Like, there was always a positive in what he said. So I think as leaders, we have to be people that see the glass as half full. You have to exude this. I was told a while ago by a former mentor that a good leader inspires hope. And this was an important lesson that I took probably to the toughest loss in my career. In 2016, we were at the Olympics and we lost in the quarterfinals to Sweden. It was the lowest finish our program had ever had in their history. And it's a moment as a leader when you know people are struggling that you have to exude optimism. You have to understand what they're dealing with. So basically the message to my players was, hey guys, listen, we can grieve right now. We can be disappointed. It wasn't a moment where I was going to talk about what we should have done better or talk about a moment, here's what we did wrong. It was a moment to remind them that there is another game to play, that we can take these lessons and we can take them moving forward. And I've really embraced the fact that now I see failure actually as opportunity. And so I think as a leader with your groups, they can't, I think being vulnerable, as Alicia said, is important, but I also think that you have to remember that you are someone that they are going to lean on and look to give them that hope that we will get through this, that this is going to pass. And so the message to my team after that game was essentially, again, we can grieve for a little bit, but we have another game to play. We have another opportunity to go out there and grow and be better. And this lesson will help us. And as how I look at this, where we are as a society, as a community, as a family, all the teams that we individually are connected to, I think it's really, if we can find that optimism to know that this is not a permanent state, this too will pass and we will come through it. And on the backside of it, we will take valuable lessons. I think that is sort of critical in terms of being a leader. And what I'll finally share with you about that hard loss in 2016 is that disappointment of 2016 was actually the catalyst for our success in 2019, because the messaging, the feedback, the information that I took, that my staff took, that my players took, even the motivation, I think deep down we're all competitive, right? We always want to get better and improve. That disappointment manifested itself in our commitment to be better in 2019 and to try and lift that trophy. I don't know how I'm doing on time, Patricia, but because I want to kind of make sure I close up here and give some time for questions. But I just want to tell the people out there, the group out there, that the work you're doing, it's essential. It's remarkable, and please know that you are so important to the global community, and your passion and your experience is critical right now. So going back full circle to the first message, keep coaching your team.
Jill, this comes from Dominique Pangrazio. What mental technique do you use to stay calm under pressure?
Turn off Twitter. I'm just kidding. Yeah, it's a great question. You know, we with our players, we try to, because obviously everyone is so unique. You know, just like what Jaden was saying, is like we wanted to make sure we tried to offer everybody something to manage the stress and the anxiety and the mental side of it. So we did have, you know, sports psychiatrists available, sports psychologists available. And I do remember one of the techniques that I think really resonated with the players. He spoke a lot about the simple act of controlling your breathing. You know, he sort of said it had a response to the brain, and in terms of just being able to calm yourself in that moment. On a personal level, I'm not someone who meditates. I think how I manage stress is something so simple that my mom told me when I was young, was just do your best, right? It's such a simple message, but if you've done everything you possibly can and you've prepared, how it plays out is going to be how it plays out. I think it's more important that you feel like you've given everything you can. It's like, you know, with my daughter, when she takes a test, if she hasn't studied and gets a poor grade, then she needs to kind of own that. If she's done everything she possibly can and just maybe didn't have a grasp of the information, she needs to kind of be kind to herself and take from that and learn from that. So the thing that I personally would do was really kind of remind myself that all my experiences to this point had prepared me for this moment. So on the night of the World Cup final, it was just trusting that every failure, every success, every high, every low has given me and brought me to this point, that I should trust in all those experiences to be able to try and now go through this experience, you know, as of a World Cup final or whatever match it is, and be at peace almost with the result. Do I hate losing? Of course I hate losing. But I think knowing that I have tried to do everything I possibly can to facilitate success for my team, it gave me some peace. So I think that was probably how I came to be, you know, in harmony with managing failure and success. You know, it was really about reminding myself that I'm trying, and I'm trying to do my very best, and to be kind to myself.